one. MPs have filled a packed Commons chamber over the last few hours to debate the third reading of the assisted dying bill. The result expected within the hour. Campaigners have also gathered outside Parliament, making final appeals both for and against the change. Some really, really interesting diverging views on this, a hugely controversial subject, of course. And it should be controversial. It was the Labour MP, Kim Ledbetter, who introduced the bill, says if it doesn't pass now, it may be years before we have another chance. In a moment, we'll talk to the organisation My Death, My Decision. But first, Mark Harper, former Tory MP and Cabinet Minister. Mark, good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian.
Nice to have you with us. I said at the very beginning of the show, you know, this invariably has sort of divided down party, not completely divided down party lines, but it's sort of most Conservatives usually against and Labour usually for. What's your position?
So my position is informed very much by my past history as a disability minister and listening to disabled people. What this bill profoundly does is change how we look at life. So my worry about it and the fact that it's not supported by a single organisation that represents disabled people. The thing they're worried about is that it starts getting to a country where you start looking at whether someone's life's worth living, whether we should invest the resources in helping them live independently, helping them live good lives, whether we should help people who are suffering with palliative care, or whether it all becomes a bit easier and cheaper to make sure they're not here. And they're worried that this is a slippery slope. It profoundly changes that conversation. That's what they're worried about, and that's why not a single organisation representing disabled people backs this bill.
And that, for many people, would be it. But, of course, you'd think based on that, Mark, what you've just said makes complete sense, and that would compel most people to sympathise with that side of this discussion. It sounds insensitive to talk about sides, but, you know, there are invariably two sides to this one. But then, of course, you do hear very passionate views on the other side of this. Has there ever been a wobble with your thoughts on this, where you thought, well, maybe I do understand the other side?
Well, I do understand the other side, and I've had constituents with views on both sides of this argument. The problem is this is one of these issues where you have competing rights. So I heard your caller earlier talked about helping people who are suffering, or rather have a terminal diagnosis, which of course is not the same thing as suffering, end their life. The problem is, if to grant that right, you put at risk the lives of many thousands, hundreds of thousands of vulnerable and disabled people, you have to then say, is that a choice you want to make? And that's what MPs are faced with. This vote today is not about the principle either. It's about this particular bill. And there are lots of MPs who support the principle of assisted dying, but think this particular bill is terrible, hasn't got any of the safeguards in it that people wanted. The House of Commons just voted this morning to not put in a safeguard that would have meant that if your only reason for wanting to end your life was that you felt that you were a burden or for financial reasons, that wouldn't have allowed you to use this. They voted that down. So it's about this bill. This bill as it stands allows somebody who feels they're a burden or life would be better for other people if they weren't here to access assisted suicide. And I think that's wrong. And that's why I hope in just under an hour MPs vote not to proceed with it.
But of course, Kim Ledbetter and others would say there are safeguards in place, though, Mark, that would stop that, because you've still got to get through. It was going to be a panel of High Court judges, now some doctors, but nonetheless qualified people. And then you've got to get somebody to administer it. So there might be others within the equation, despite your request as the patient, that profoundly disagree.
Well, let me pick up the safeguards point. So when this bill was originally voted on, there was a strong safeguard, which was a High Court judge had to rule on the case and listen to evidence. That was taken out. You now have a panel which doesn't even have to see the person concerned. They can do it all with written paperwork. And one of the experts on that panel is a psychiatrist, the Royal College of Psychiatrists, which is neutral on the principle of assisted dying, is against this bill because it says this bill does not have the necessary safeguards. So the professionals who would be involved in having to administer this process don't think this bill has the right safeguards in place. So even if you support the principle assisted dying and assisted suicide. This particular bill, and that's what MPs are voting on this afternoon. They're not voting on the principle anymore. They're voting on the specific legislation. The experts don't think it has the safeguards.
In terms of this private member status, I mean, that's, of course, part of our democracy. And, you know, it might mean MPs have got to go to work on a Friday, perish the thought. But nonetheless, it's got a, you know, it's got a different set of kind of regulations around it. Some say too much wiggle room. Do you think, in a way, that dilutes something, given the seriousness of this?
My own view is that the process, I think, has been flawed. It should be a free vote. It should absolutely be up to MPs' consciences about how they vote. And there are people from all parties with different views. But I think the process, this should have been a government bill done by the government, with all the proper resources to support it. I think expecting a single member of parliament to steer it through was a mistake. In the end, if this gets through, the government's going to be responsible for delivering the service. This bill means changing the founding principles of the NHS away from a service that helps preserve life. And in the end, I think the government, if it wanted to have this, it should have taken responsibility and done it. Doing it through a private member's bill, I think, was fatally flawed. Yeah.
We just had a text from somebody called Becca who says MPs voting for themselves, not for the people of Britain. It should be a referendum. I know we can have that argument all day long as to what should and shouldn't be a referendum. There are some countries that have extended referendum into more sort of regular policy decisions. Is it of such significance that something like this should go to the country, as it were, Mark?
No, look, I believe that it should be decided by members of parliament. And I think MPs, to be fair, on both sides of the argument, have taken this very seriously. But it's not just about the principle. I think you could ask the public about the principle, but if you're going to ask people to vote on legislation, it's about the detail. And I don't think it's realistic to expect every member of the public to spend hours and hours and hours wading through the details of legislation. It's the job of MPs to do that and to make sure the detail has all the right safeguards in it. And that's where I think this bill, even if you support the principle, is fatally flawed. Yeah,
it's about the technicalities of the bill, as it were. Yeah. Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Harper, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, of course, thank you to him. Let's speak to Carmen Sumidawira, who is Director of My Death, My Decision. Carmen, good afternoon to you. Nice to have you with us. You heard what Mark was saying there, and of course we are talking about the technicalities of a bill as distinct from the principle. But nonetheless, it's naturally leads us into discussing the principle of assisted dying. Just give us, I can guess from the name of your organisation, where you stand on this. But do you sympathise with the other argument that if the bill isn't correct, then there is potential abuse and no state should ever be endorsing something that could potentially go horribly wrong?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, the clue's in the name. I very much believe that, you know, it is my death and therefore my decision as to how I would like to end my life. And I agree that there is a real need for precaution and safeguards in this bill. And I'm very confident that actually in the process of the private members bill, many safeguards have been put in place. The panel that you alluded to actually consists of a social worker, a psychiatrist, and a senior legal professional that could be an ex-judge. Some say it's watered down, but what I would say is interdisciplinary work in this way is a really good way where different people with a different point of view can assess whether this person has the capacity and sustained wish for an assisted death. It also needs 2 independent medical professionals to look at the same case. And that's a total of 5 individuals that have to sign off on this before an assisted death can take place.
What is your hope for this afternoon? I mean, this is, you know, for many, many years. I mean, this is the recent Ledbetter bill, the private members bill, but of course not the first time this has been discussed. What's your hope for within the hour when they vote? I mean, clearly you want them to want this to pass, but does it need to pass so compellingly that would make the difference to you?
My hope is that the MPs today look at, and I know you mentioned the general public earlier, you know, we might not have a referendum, but we do have very accurate polling. And even yesterday, we saw that a YouGov poll suggests that 73% of the UK public, a representative group of the UK public, support the bill as it stands, not just in principle. And so, to me, MPs need to be in line with public opinion, which has been quite, stable for many, many years. And so this is a really historic moment for MPs to basically give the people what they want.
Yeah. Oregon is often mentioned, as you will be aware, as the kind of sort of totemic example of how an assisted dying bill can work with, as I understand it, little or no controversy, none of the kind of potential bear traps that people have warned against. Does this bill completely replicate Oregon, though?
I wouldn't be able to speak to the absolute intricacies of the Oregon bill. So,
but you're familiar with the comparison.
I'm familiar with the comparison, and what I would say is that we're very lucky in that international evidence across multiple countries shows us that assisted dying bills are basically have no evidence of things like coercion, of things like manipulation. So Switzerland has had their bill for over 80 years. And that's a long time to be able to collect data and understand the workings of these kinds of mechanisms.
Sorry, how many years did you say Switzerland have had this bill?
80.
80. Wow. Good.
80.
I had no idea. So we learn something every day. They've never had, because the scenario, as you know, Carmen, is, Granny's got a few quid in the bank and, a little gentle nudge, come on, Gran, take the potion, that kind of thing. There is, as far as you know, no evidence of this happening anywhere.
No, absolutely not. And, I myself was a nurse in the NHS and, we all health workers in the NHS are trained very rigorously to assess capacity. And, capacity means that you yourself must have this sustained wish. You have to reconfirm that wish again with a medical professional down the line. And the panel also has to be convinced that you have the capacity to make this choice. So I don't see a very high risk of coercion in this space.
Listen, Carmen, thank you for your time. Appreciate that. Carmen Sudi-Wiera, Director of My Death, My Decision. There are two distinct sides on this, and I know, as Mark Harper was saying, he knows his way around the parliamentary system. This is about approving the bill as the bill being fit for purpose to be the one that would eventually become law. But ultimately, what is being debated are the pros and cons, the rights, the wrongs on both sides of this. And again, what I said at the beginning, which I hope is reasonable, when you ask, should you have the right to choose your time of death if you're terminally ill and in some sort of pain, take a potion, go to sleep. I don't think anyone, when put like that, disagrees with that. But this all comes down to the state allowing it to happen and the state giving it the green light and the potential abuse. Our last guest, Carmen, said no evidence around the planet of abuse. And she said that Switzerland have had this in place for 80 years. Man, I had no idea that was the case. They were debating this just shy of the war. Extraordinary.